In this video, I let a restaurant go to hell on a busy Saturday night and it kickstarted my career. Sweep the side alley until it's spotless? You got it, boss. And we're having a sixth kid we can't afford, so we expect you to give us your college fund. I let a restaurant go to hell on a busy Saturday night and it kickstarted my career. This was when I was 18. I'm 34 now, so 2004, 2005. Think pre-iPhone. But cell phones like the Nokia 3310 existed, which I had one because my parents wanted to make sure I could always be contacted. I worked at a bar chain restaurant for 6 months. Let's call it C. It was a completely new store. When we opened, we were the only building for 8 blocks except for the sister restaurant next door that was part of the same investment group as C. It was a decent upper middle class white neighborhood, so we'd get lots of people in the door. I was originally hired as to-go, but I was trained up in almost everything in the restaurant and I frequently filled shifts, and I got the most hours for it. It was the worst job I ever had and still is. After getting shifted around to different homes to go, QA, host, sometimes server, I eventually ended up in bus, cleaning tables. They promised they would move me off of bus once we had bussers, but as we'll find out later, that day never came. The main reason this happened is that we ran out of bussers. They tried hiring bussers at a rapid rate, but it didn't work. The average survival rate for a busser was 2 weeks, including training time. Eventually, our reputation of chewing out bussers made its rounds. No one would even show up for interviews for the job. At C, a pecking order had been established. At the top, you had the managers. Then it was the servers. Then it was the bar servers, restaurant servers, etc. Guess what was at the bottom? That's right, bussers. Anytime I spoke up about how people needed to pre-bus their tables, people scoffed and said I should just do my job. I explained how I could clear an entire restaurant by myself if everyone pre-bussed their tables, 30 seconds per table versus 8 minutes per table. Deaf ears. So I have to explain about why there's a huge time differential between a pre-bus table and a total bus table. If the servers took every plate off the table, even if the table was grotty, I could wipe it into my bucket, clean up a few things, wipe off the seat, reset the center of the table, and move on to the next table. I'll be in and out in 30 seconds and on to the next table. However, if I had to total bus a table, I'd have to take all of the plates, organize everything on the tab. Time varied depending on the number of people at the table. 2 minutes for a 2-top, 4 minutes for a 4-top, etc. If a table had ordered lots of drinks, multiple fajitas, each fajita meal contained no less than 6 dishes, and or had been particularly unsanitary about their eating practices, unruly kids usually, you could add up to 3 minutes per table. This also compounds that I had to go back to the kitchen and sort through all of the plates, cups, etc. Well, 2 months into my we're gonna move you off of busing once we find bussers, it's a busy Saturday night. I'm talking 1 hour wait at 6:30 p.m. Half the tables are currently dirty and I'm working my ass off, but each table takes about 5 minutes because no one is pre-bussing tables. I'm told the priority is the restaurant, so I had to tell the bar waiters that they probably wouldn't be bussed at all because it would be too busy. They were not having that, and the on-shift AM, which is assistant manager, told me I should do my job, but I should still prioritize the restaurant, not the bar. Whatever. I'm constantly telling servers to pre-bus their tables only to be ignored. It was a particularly bad night, so I asked if the dishwashers could help me out when I brought back my tabs instead of organizing everything myself. They were nice, so they agreed, and it was a decent system. Cut out 2 to 3 minutes per table. It was still pretty hell, with lots of people wanting food. It still didn't help that I had to go back to the kitchen every time there was a full bus table. Enter Karen, queen of the bar server bitches. Remember that pecking order I mentioned? Yeah, she was the queen of the server order. She was one of the ones that constantly berated me for my job performance, despite the fact that I did more than almost anyone else in the restaurant. She made my last 2 months a living hell, constantly telling me I didn't do a good job, that she had to wait for me too long, etc. I constantly told the AMs and manager about the disrespect I received, and they said I should just man up. She never got a single write-up. One particularly busy Saturday night, Karen was a server in the bar, which meant she wasn't in the priority. I told her that I couldn't bus her tables unless she pre-bussed them, and only if there weren't restaurant tables I needed to bus. She was constantly telling me I needed to bus her tables, and I was lazy. Despite the fact that I had lifted over 300 tabs that night, she wasn't the priority. She didn't pre-bus any of her tables, and she was always on the back dock smoking. Once that night, a nice couple saw me working in the table behind them and politely asked if they could talk to their server so they could take their order. She had left them alone for 15 minutes while she was smoking on the back dock and flirting with one of the prep cooks. She scoffed when I interrupted her flirting. "Oh, I'm sorry, Karen. I'm sorry I interrupted your 6th flirting break today so you can do the thing you were hired to do." At 6:30 p.m. that night, the restaurant got flooded with people. 1 hour waits, and I had to push my ass to the limit. I was flipping tables despite absolutely zero of the servers pre-bussing. However, since the restaurant was the priority, I couldn't get to her tables at all. Finally, we got a dip. I could finally get to her 3 tables and all of them aren't pre-bussed, so I have to do the full bussing for her tables, despite they have been vacant for almost 45 minutes. After the first table, she follows me back to the second table and tells me I need to hurry and I'm garbage at my job, and I'm making her lose money. I tell her to leave me alone and don't reprimand me in the front of the house. It was embarrassing, with bar patrons looking over their shoulder, and I could see they honestly felt sorry for me. I was at the lowest point in my life at that point in time. I honestly felt like I was the worst human being in the world. Once she left, I stopped bussing for a second and sat down at the table for a second. I looked at the dirty half-full tab, and I got up. The table wasn't finished, and I left my dirty tab on the seat. I went to the back end to go. It wasn't active, and this was before widespread internet. We got maybe 15 orders per night, so the managers had relegated to-go duties to the QA that serviced the rest of the restaurant. It was easily accessible for them, but it was also vacant at that point in time. Call in to go was a relatively new and novel concept. I put down my headset, turned it off, pulled out a to-go pad, and wrote a full note noting how this restaurant is going to go down the toilet unless the managers get balls and reprimand the staff for treating bussers like crap. I then left without telling anyone. I was called on my cell phone about 5 minutes into my drive home, and the AM told me, "Hey, you still have a shift." My response was, "No, I don't. I quit." Their response, "You still have a shift." Again, my response is, "No. I fucking don't need to be disrespected like I have. I quit." She had the gall to repeat herself. "You still have a shift." I hung up and turned off my phone. It turned out that I left just in time for the dinner rush. Saturdays we closed at midnight, so for those last 4 hours, it was hell in a hand basket. I was told that the AM prevented anyone from going home until 2 a.m. because the restaurant was basically a trash basket by the end. Wait times at 10 p.m. were capped because they were well over 2 hours. Host told me later on that she had to turn away 40 families that night because everything went to hell. Some people just left while waiting for a table. Orders were getting misplaced. The information made it up to corporate, and they had to call in a fixer team to figure out what happened. They wanted to call me, but I wasn't going to talk to them. There was some restructuring in the business. The manager got shifted to another position in the company. The AM that called on staff was let go. Karen wrote up, relegated to the shit shifts, and eventually left. I didn't return for 2 months, but not as an employee, but as a customer. I was told all this by one of the remaining AMs, the one that actually treated me like a human being, and he gave me all of my tip shares, which was nice. The next best part of this, the day after I left C, my best friend found an ad that a huge game maker was looking for QAs. We applied that day, and the following week I got interviewed and hired on the spot. He didn't make it. It was the beginning of my programming career. I advanced through that job, got over to automation programming, then got hired at other companies. Now I'm a senior programmer for a sheriff's office with 14 years of programming experience. Sweep the side alley until it's spotless? You got it, boss. A couple of summers ago, I took a part-time job as a server at a local pub/restaurant. I had a full-time job, so this was just for experience and to pick up some tip money on the side. The pub had been closed for a few years after the old owner couldn't afford it anymore, so when the new owners picked it up and got it ready for opening again, the town was pretty excited. It's a bit of a town landmark, right in the middle of our main street. I applied as soon as I found out and ended up getting hired. I was one of the younger servers, alongside a few older ones. Most of us were women, and the older servers really looked out for us inexperienced ones. Overall, the others on the team were really nice, save for a couple of nasty ones. My new boss, Gary, not his actual name, was, well, not as great. Gary's favorite saying was, if you have time to lean, you have time to clean. He thought if we took even a second to catch our breaths, he was losing money from us slacking off. On slow days, he would find menial, pointless tasks for us to complete. Wipe the bar counter, even though it's been wiped like 3 times in the past half hour already. Reorganize the menus, even though they're already perfectly organized. Fill up more condiment cups, even though there's already 50 salsa cups ready to go. Stuff like that. The most tedious task, especially in the early months of the summer, was sweeping the side alley that leads to the patio. There were these massive maple trees along the path, and they could drop leaves and seeds like crazy, especially on windy days. One afternoon in early June, there were only a handful of us working. It gets slow, and I get assigned the sweeping task. I sweep up the back alleyway as much as I can, but the wind is blowing the trees just keep dumping more and more seeds onto the path. I do my best until a coworker calls me back inside to help serve tables. She didn't want me missing out on tips either. Bless her. I seat the table, get their orders, and start entering them in. Just then, Gary storms up to me. Gary, what are you doing? Me. Entering table 15's order. Why? Gary, the side alley is a mess. I don't pay you to slack off. Me. I swept up as much as I could before this table walked in. It's a really windy day. That's why it keeps getting full of leaves and seeds. You're more than welcome to check the compost bin for how much I actually did sweep up. Gary. No. We don't finish things halfway here. You're going back out there and finishing your job. I want it to be spotless. Linda, not her real name, can take table 15. Gary then switched table 15 from my account to Linda, an older server's account. Linda and I got along great. She worked as both a server and a bartender and used to be a general manager with another restaurant chain. She decided to join this team after her retirement as a part-time hobby. She taught me a whole lot while I worked there, and I'm grateful to have met her. Linda, I'll hang on to your share of the tips. Best not make Gary angry. Me. He really wants me to make it spotless. Does he know how impossible that is? I'd have to be out there all shift. That's when Linda gave me a smile and the light bulb turned on in my head. I still had 2 hours left in my shift, and it was going to be right into dinner rush. I grabbed the broom and dustpan and I got to work. I would sweep as much as I could, but every so often, another strong breeze would come by and hundreds more helicopter seeds would flutter to the ground. I kept going. At this point, it started to get busier. A lineup soon began to form out the door. Linda was taking care of tables, but very soon it became clear that the other servers needed someone else to deal with everyone. Linda let them know what was up, and most of them who tolerated Gary at best and hated him at worst understood. I kept on sweeping. The task was never ending. I scooped up pile after pile after pile of leaves and seeds to no avail. After 45 minutes or so, the side door opened suddenly to reveal a red-faced Gary. Gary, why aren't you in there serving customers? Me. Gestures at the alleyway. As if the gods themselves had heard the malicious compliance brewing, another strong breeze shook more seeds onto the partially cleared alley right in front of Gary's face. The look on his face was priceless. He told me in a quieter voice to get back inside and start taking orders. I handed the broom off to him, and he began to sweep and sweep and sweep. The other servers and I had a good laugh about it inside, and I managed to make decent tips that night. Gary realized he couldn't exactly fire me for following his orders perfectly and ended up being more relaxed about the side alley. No one really cares about some leaves and seeds on the ground, so long as they're not obstructing anyone. I ended up working there for the rest of the summer before quitting. I hear the pub had to be passed on to new owners after Gary's disorganization got the better of him. My next shift, I found a broken broom in the garbage. I'd like to think it was the work of Gary, red in the face and exhausted from battling against Mother Nature. We're having a sixth kid we can't afford, so we expect you to give us your college fund. I, female, 19, am my parents' second child. I have three brothers, 21, 13, and 7, and a sister, 16. We grew up poor. Our parents were often dependent on financial help from relatives, friends, etc. for raising us. This is because even though my dad has a mediocre job and my mom doesn't work, they just kept on popping out one kid after another. My parents are very religious and believe that children are a gift from God. Personally, I think that's total BS. My parents' reproductive choices wouldn't bother me if it hadn't caused mine and my siblings' lives to turn to shit. While growing up, we never had new clothes or toys. We had to accept handouts from family members who were better off. We never went out or did anything fun. To top it off, we were all well aware that the rest of the family looked down on us for constantly asking for handouts. Now, my older brother and I have managed to get into good colleges and are looking forward to a future that would be better than our parents' lives. He and I were staying at our parents' place for a while due to the COVID-19 lockdown. One morning, my parents called all five of us into the living room. Mom said she had great news. The smile that was forming on my face died a quick death when she said, "We're pregnant." I lost my temper. I asked them how they could be so stupid and irresponsible. Do they not have enough financial troubles already that they have to bring in another mouth to feed? My older brother tried to calm me down, but I was livid. After a lifetime of scarcity, because of my parents' stupidity, they still hadn't learned their lesson. I asked them how they planned to provide for the kid. My dad told me I would have to give up the money our great uncle had left me. He had left all five of us some money which only we could access when we turned 18. I said, hell no. That money would help pay for my college expenses. He called me selfish for not being there for family. I told them if they couldn't provide for the kid, they should get an abortion. My mom started crying and called me a heartless monster. Dad told me he was disgusted with me. I told him there was no way I was going to pay for their stupidity, and the only thing I would be willing to pay for is a termination. What I was really worried about was my siblings' lives getting even worse. My older brother and I have escaped our parents' clutches, but the others, especially my younger sister, will be expected to help take care of this baby. No teenager deserves to have their adolescence ruined by diapers and a screaming baby. I know what it's like, as I had to go through that. It was expected of me to be an unpaid nanny to my younger brothers and sister. My older brother could go out with his friends and have fun, but I had to stay home and help give baths and feed the toddlers. I decided to get some family members involved so they could talk some sense into my parents. I called my mom's maternal cousin. She's one of my favorite people. When I told her that mom and dad were having another kid, she reacted with, "What? Again?" I told her everything and how they expected me to hand over my inheritance. She said she was going to speak to my parents and told me not to sign over anything. I promised her I wouldn't. Of course I won't. I also called two of my first cousins, one of whom is an accountant, so she could explain to my parents how much of a financial liability this baby is going to be and try to convince them to either abort or give it up for adoption. I moved out of my parents' home a few days ago. I was only going to stay there till the lockdown was relaxed, but I just can't bear to listen to my mom's nagging about how this baby is a blessing and that I want to kill it. I've moved into a friend's basement for a minimal rent. My mom's cousin paid them a visit about a week ago and tried to tell them they weren't doing this child any favors by bringing it into a life of poverty. My mom was very rude to my aunt and told her that a woman who chose to remain barren will never understand a mother's love. My aunt never wanted kids nor had any, one of the reasons she's my fave. My dad told her to get out. Aunt told me there was nothing she could do, but she did try. I didn't blame her. The cousin tried to explain the economic impact this kid would have, and my mom cried about how everyone was trying to take away her baby. What the fuck? The intervention didn't do shit, so now I've decided to cut contact with my parents. I just can't watch my family slide further and further into a hellhole. I'll be maintaining contact with my sister, 16, just to make sure my parents can't brainwash her. My older brother is going to stay in touch with all of them, which is a good thing as he can act as a link between me and the other siblings if my parents ever forbid them from talking to me. Otherwise, I'm done with these people.